A homeless woman heard the hiss of a silencer and a child's unearthly scream. Without thinking, she threw herself in front of the Vampire King's heir, taking 4 silver bullets meant for his heart. She thought saving the monster's son would cost her life. She didn't know it would give her one back. Welcome back, my beautiful friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The grate was colder than usual. Tessa Cole gripped the edges of her oversized army green jacket with both hands, her fingers numb from the Boston winter as she huddled over the dying steam vent. 3 days of snow had turned her alleyway in the financial district into a frozen tomb. And now she was scraping the last of a discarded energy bar wrapper, trying to find a single calorie to burn. She'd been invisible in this city for 2 years. Long enough to know which high-rises had security guards who looked the other way during a blizzard. Long enough to recognize the rhythm of the city's predators. The drunk businessmen at closing time. The aggressive panhandlers. The things that moved too fast in the shadows. But the sleek black sedan that glided silently to the curb at 1 a.m. was different. Tessa froze, breath huffing in the air as the vehicle idled 30 feet away. The back door opened with a hydraulic hiss. A man emerged, tall, terrifyingly pale, moving with a fluid grace that made the falling snow seem to pause around him. Even in the darkness, Tessa could see the sharp cut of his black suit with crimson accents, the predatory shine of shoes that cost more than her life's earnings. Valerius, a voice whispered in her mind, though he hadn't spoken. A small figure stepped out after him. A boy, maybe 10 years old, dressed in pure white that seemed to glow against the grime of the street. Thin, fragile, spectral. The man, his father, Tessa realized, placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder, guiding him toward the service entrance of the tower. That's when Tessa saw the terror on the boy's face. Not the fear of the cold, but the fear of being hunted. She should have looked down. She should have pulled her hood up and disappeared into the steam like she'd learned to do. In 2 years on the streets, the first rule had kept her alive. Never look the monsters in the eye. The boy's gaze met hers, for just a second. Violet eyes. Ancient. Pleading. Then the silence shattered. Muzzle flashes sparked from the rooftop across the street.
No.
2 angles. A crossfire. The wet thwip-thwip of suppressed gunfire.
Silver.
The father roared, a sound that wasn't human, moving with impossible speed to shield his son. But the angle was wrong. The second shooter was behind them. Tessa's body moved before her brain caught up. The old training, buried under years of guilt and grief, suddenly snapped into focus with crystal clarity. She'd been a pediatric nurse once. She knew exactly the trajectory of a projectile. She also knew how fragile a child's heart was. Her legs pumped across the icy concrete. The cold was forgotten. The assassins were shouting in a language that sounded like grinding stones. She couldn't hear words, just the hiss of death, and the father was tearing a lamppost out of the concrete to use as a shield, and the boy was frozen, and none of it mattered because Tessa was already diving. She crashed into the child like a shield, wrapping her arms around his small frame and twisting her body to take the impact against the sedan's armored chassis. The boy's gasp cut off as she pinned him. The first bullet hit her left shoulder blade. It didn't feel like lead. It felt like liquid fire. Silver nitrate. A poison meant for the undead, tearing through human flesh with chemical fury. She heard herself scream, but her arms tightened around the boy instinctively. The second bullet hit lower, just above her kidney. The third punched through her right arm. The fourth, she didn't feel where it landed. Everything had gone white-hot and distant at the same time. Tessa was aware of collapsing, of pulling the boy down with her, of tucking his head against her chest the way she'd been taught to hold a patient during a seizure. She was aware of a massacre happening around her, screams, the tearing of metal, the sound of bodies hitting walls with impossible force. She was aware of the boy's freezing cold breathing against her neck. She was aware that he was safe. Selim, the father's voice, echoing like thunder. Footsteps approaching, hands grabbing her, trying to pull her away from the boy. No, Tessa heard herself whisper, blood bubbling past her lips. Don't touch him. He's sterile. Then someone was prying her arms loose, and the cold pavement was gone, replaced by arms that felt like marble. The world was tilting sideways in a way that meant hypovolemic shock was setting in. She'd treated it 100 times in the ER. Funny how different it felt when it was your own blood. The father's face appeared above her, his eyes glowing a terrifying shade of red. For just a moment, their gaze locked, and Tessa saw something she hadn't expected. Absolute confusion. He was staring at her like she was a mathematical impossibility. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice vibrating in her bones. "Why did you intervene?" Tessa tried to answer, to tell him about the Hippocratic Oath, but her mouth wouldn't work right. The edges of her vision were going dark, fuzzy around the corners like a burnout bulb. The last thing she heard before everything went black was the boy's voice, sounding like wind chimes in a storm. "Father," she bled for me. The human bled for me. Then nothing. Valerius Thorn had decapitated his first rival at 19. He'd ruled the Night Court for 3 centuries, crushed rebellions, and built an empire on the blood of anyone foolish enough to hunt his kind. In 300 years of running the Throne clan, he'd learned to trust nothing that breathed, kill everything that threatened, and never owe a debt to cattle. But right now, carrying a dying human woman and his shell-shocked heir into the private elevator of his fortress, Valerius Thorn had no idea what the hell was happening. "Seal the perimeter," he roared at his thralls, his voice shaking the glass walls of the lobby. "I want the Varkalak clan hunted down. Leave none standing." The penthouse had been fortified against sunlight and holy wars for 50 years. Reinforced UV glass, blood banks, enough ancient weaponry to hold off a crusade. Valerius lowered the woman onto a velvet chaise lounge, completely ignoring the priceless antique fabric as her blood, bright, red, human blood, soaked into it. For holes in her back. For silver bullets meant to liquidate his son. "Get Dr. Eris." Valerius snapped at the air. "Tell him to bring the extraction kit. Now." Dr. Eris was the clan's personal hematologist. Ancient and precise. But even as the security system locked down, Valerius's mind was racing through the impossibility of what he'd just witnessed. Humans ran from them. Humans screamed. Humans died. They didn't jump in front of silver bullets for monsters. "Father," Selim whispered, standing by the lounge, his white suit stained with Tessa's red blood. "Is she ending?" "She's not permitted to end," Valerius said, his tone freezing the air in the room. He stared down at her. Tattered army green jacket. Thin face, gaunt from hunger. Smell of the streets. A nobody. A ghost. A ghost who had just saved the Vampire King's lineage, without hesitation, without knowing who they were, without any possible hope of survival. "Save her," Valerius commanded as the doctor burst into the room. Dr. Eris looked at the human, then at the king. "Sire, the silver, it will kill immortal in minutes. Then work faster." Valerius's eyes burned crimson. "She bought a life with hers. I will not have that debt go unpaid." "Dispose of her," the lieutenant snarled, gesturing to the unconscious woman bleeding out on the Persian rug. "The police will be swarming the block in 3 minutes. We cannot have a corpse in the penthouse, sire." She's a loose end. Valerius Thorn did not look at his subordinate. His gaze remained fixed on the woman's ashen face, watching the shallow, jagged rise and fall of her chest. The smell of copper and ozone, blood and silver, filled the air, drowning out the scent of expensive leather and old money. "She is not a corpse yet," Valerius said, his voice low and devoid of warmth. "Sire, she is a witness. A stray. Even if she survives the toxicity, she breaks the masquerade. The council will demand." Valerius turned, his movement a blur of violence that ended with his hand wrapped around the lieutenant's throat. He lifted the vampire off the floor effortlessly. "She bled for the prince," Valerius hissed, the sound vibrating through the room like a cello string snapped under tension. "She took the silver meant for my blood. No one touches her but Eris. Take her to the sanctum.
Now."
He dropped the lieutenant, who scrambled back, gasping. The order had been given. The sanctum was less a hospital and more a cathedral of preservation hidden deep within the fortress. Sterile steel clashed with ancient stone, and the lighting was kept dim to protect sensitive eyes. Dr. Eris moved with the jerky, unnatural speed of the very old, his hands gloved in black nitrile as he hovered over the woman. "Silver nitrate," Eris muttered, his expression one of clinical distaste as he cut away the tattered layers of her army green jacket. "Barbaric. It prevents coagulation in our kind. In a human, it burns through the nervous system like acid." Valerius stood in the shadows of the operating theater. Selim stood beside him, silent, his pristine white suit ruined by the dark stains of the woman's sacrifice. They watched as Eris used long forceps to dig into the woman's shoulder. The sound of metal hitting metal, the bullet dropping into a steel tray, rang out like a funeral bell.
Clink, 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 clink.
"She's crashing," Eris announced, his voice devoid of panic, merely stating a fact. "The toxicity is stopping her heart. I need the O-negative reserves. And clear the table." A nurse, a thrall with glassy, obedient eyes, moved to strip the rest of the woman's filth-crusted clothing to access the lower wounds. She pulled off the heavy, waterlogged boots that had been held together with duct tape. As the left boot came free, something slid out from the sole and clattered onto the tile floor. Valerius stepped forward, the movement fluid and predatory. He crouched and picked up the object. It was a laminated card, cracked down the middle and worn at the edges. He wiped a smear of street grime from the plastic with his thumb. "Boston General Hospital. Registered nurse. Tessa Cole. Pediatrics." The photo on the ID showed a woman who looked nothing like the skeletal, gray figure dying on the table. The woman in the photo had light in her eyes. Her hair was clean.
She was smiling.
"A healer," Valerius murmured, the word feeling strange on his tongue. "That explains the placement," Eris noted, sewing a vessel with impossible speed. She took the impacts on bone to shield the boy's vitals.
She angled her body.
She knew exactly how to be a human shield. Valerius stared at the ID, then at Tessa's face. It made no sense. In 3 centuries of ruling the Night Court, he had categorized humanity into 2 bins, livestock and threats. They ran, they screamed, or they hunted. They did not sacrifice. Why would a creature of the sun throw herself into the dark for a boy who smelled of the grave? There was no profit in it. No glory. She was a homeless woman saving a predator's heir. It violated every rule of survival he had spent 300 years perfecting. Why? Valerius whispered to the silence. "Perhaps," Dr. Eris said, snapping his gloves off as the heart monitor steadied into a weak, rhythmic beep. "She didn't see a monster, sire. She just saw a child." Valerius looked at Selim, who who had moved to the bedside and was clutching the woman's cold, limp hand. The Vampire King felt a crack in his armor, a terrifying fissure in his understanding of the world. He owed a life debt to a nurse who had lost everything, and the weight of it was heavier than the 4 silver bullets sitting in the tray. Tessa woke to a silence, so profound it felt heavy, pressing against her eardrums like deep water. There was no rumble of delivery trucks, no distant sirens, no biting wind cutting through the gaps in her jacket. Instead, there was the scent of ozone and ancient dust, and the sensation of silk against skin that hadn't known softness in years. She opened her eyes. The ceiling was high, vaulted, and painted in shadows. She tried to sit up, but her body screamed in protest, a chorus of agony radiating from her shoulder and spine that forced a ragged gasp from her throat. "Easy," a voice whispered, though no one was there. Tessa scrambled backward, ignoring the tearing pain, pressing herself against the velvet headboard. The room was vast, filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, but her eyes locked onto the windows. They were floor to ceiling, but there was no sky visible. The glass was thick, tinted a violent, opaque black. UV-proof, her medical brain supplied unbidden. The kind used for patients with severe light sensitivity or things that burn in the sun. The memory hit her like a physical blow. The alley. The silver bullets. The man with the glowing red eyes. She wasn't in a hospital. She was in the lair. Panic, cold and primal, flooded her veins. She swung her legs off the bed, her bare feet hitting a rug that cost more than she had made in her entire life. She needed a weapon. A lamp. A shard of glass. Anything. She stumbled toward the heavy double doors, her vision swimming, clutching her bandaged side. She didn't know what they wanted with her, but she knew what happened to humans who got too close to the myths. They disappeared. The doors opened before she could reach them. Valerius Thorn stood in the threshold. He had shed the blood-soaked jacket, now wearing a charcoal shirt that seemed to absorb the dim light. He didn't step inside. He remained in the hallway, standing with a stillness that was entirely unnatural, his hands clasped behind his back. "Stay back," Tessa rasped, her voice sounding like grinding gravel. She stumbled away, her legs trembling, until she hit the heavy glass of the window. "Don't come near me. I have no intention of entering your space," Valerius said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly modulated, like a predator soothing a cornered animal. "You have 4 surgical drains and 27 stitches holding your torso together, Miss Cole. Running will only undo Dr. Eris's work." You're one of them," she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "The Night Walkers." "I am Valerius Thorn," he corrected gently, though the name carried the weight of a thunderclap. "And you are the woman who decided that my son's life was worth more than your own." Tessa looked around the room, searching for an escape, but there was only the vampire blocking the door and the impenetrable glass behind her. "I want to leave. I want to go back to the street. Just let me go." "You cannot. You're full of silver toxicity and suffer from massive blood loss. You would die before you reached the elevator." He paused, his crimson eyes dimming to a somber maroon. "And there is another reason you cannot leave yet." Tessa gripped the window frame, her knuckles white. "What reason?" Valerius looked down the hallway, his expression shifting into something that looked uncomfortably like parental exhaustion.
"Selim, the boy you saved.
He has refused to take nourishment since we brought you here." Tessa blinked, the professional nurse and her overriding the fear for a split second. "Nourishment? You mean?" "Blood," Valerius said flatly. "He is refusing to feed. He sits outside your door, believing that if he consumes life while you fight for yours, it would be a betrayal of your sacrifice. He is starving himself, Miss Cole, until he sees with his own eyes that you are awake." Tessa stared at the immortal king, seeing the cracks in his terrifying facade. He wasn't just a monster keeping a prisoner. He was a father who couldn't get his son to eat. "He's just a child," she whispered, the terror in her chest loosening just a fraction. "He is a vampire," Valerius corrected, stepping back to leave the doorway clear. "But yes, he is a child, and he is waiting for you." The High Council chamber was a mausoleum of black marble and bad intentions, buried 3 stories beneath the penthouse. The air here was stagnant, recycling the same dust that had settled before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. 6 elders sat at a crescent table carved from obsidian, their skin the color of parchment, their eyes void of empathy. Valerius stood before them, not as a petitioner, but as a predator waiting for an excuse to bite. "You brought a warm blood into the inner sanctum," Elder Silas hissed. He was 400 years old and wore his cruelty like a second skin. "You allowed a human, a stray, no less, to witness the efficacy of silver against our kind. She has seen the speed. She has seen the healing. She knows what we are, Valerius. She knows that she saved the heir when my own security failed," Valerius replied, his voice echoing off the cold stone walls. "She took 4 bullets meant for my son. That buys her more than silence, Silas. It buys her immunity. It buys her a quick death," a female elder, Vespera, interjected calmly. She tapped a manicured fingernail against the table. "The treaty is absolute. No witnesses. We cannot rely on the gratitude of a homeless woman to keep the masquerade. She is a loose end, Valerius. A thread that, if pulled, could unravel the Boston Coven. Give her a painless end. It is mercy compared to what the Varkalak will do if they find her." The room murmured in agreement. To them, Tessa Cole wasn't a hero. She was a biological liability. A walking breach of contract. "I will not kill her," Valerius said, the temperature in the room dropping 10 degrees. "And I will not turn her against her will. She remains under my protection until she is healed." "Your protection extends only as far as we allow it." Silas stood up, his shadow stretching long and thin across the floor. "If you are too compromised by sentiment to secure the clan, we will send an enforcer to the medical wing tonight." The woman ceases to breathe by dawn. The heavy iron doors at the back of the chamber groaned. They didn't just open, they were shoved with a force that warped the hinges. The council fell silent. Valerius turned, expecting an assassin. Instead, he saw his son. Selim stood in the doorway. He looked terrifyingly small against the vastness of the dark corridor, but the air around him crackled with static energy. He was still wearing the blood-stained white suit, refusing to change out of the evidence of Tessa's sacrifice. But it was his eyes that made the ancient vampires stiffen in their chairs. They were glowing a violent, incandescent violet. The boy walked into the room, his footsteps silent, moving with a predatory fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for a child who hadn't fed in 3 days. He walked past Valerius, standing between the king and the council. "You will not touch her," Selim said. His voice wasn't the wind chime whisper Valerius was used to. It was a low growl, vibrating with the ancient power of the Thorn bloodline. "Selim," Silas warned, though he looked uneasy. "Go to your chambers. This is not a place for." "She bled for me," Selim interrupted, baring fangs that were just beginning to descend. He pointed a pale finger at Silas. "You call her meat. You call her a loose end." The boy's glowing eyes swept the room, daring the elders to challenge him. "She is Pack," Selim declared, using the old tongue word Wolfenkin, a term usually reserved for those bonded by blood and war. "She is mine, and the next hand raised against her will be severed from the wrist." Silence stretched tight as a bowstring. A human claimed as pack by a vampire heir was unheard of. It was heresy, but it was also a claim of ownership that, by ancient law, could not be contested without challenging the claimant to combat. Valerius looked at his son, this fierce, terrifying creature defending a human nurse, and felt a surge of pride that nearly brought him to his knees. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Selim's shoulder, presenting a united front of lethal power. "You heard the heir," Valerius said, his voice dropping to the register of a death sentence. He looked directly at Silas. "Tessa Cole is under the personal aegis of the throne. She is not a guest. She is not a prisoner. She is kin." Valerius turned his gaze to the rest of the table, his crimson eyes burning. "Let this be my decree. Any member of this clan, or any other, who harms a hair on her head answers to me, and I will not be granting quick deaths." He turned on his heel, guiding Selim toward the door. Meeting adjourned. The penthouse was a cage of gold and velvet, and Tessa was the exotic bird trapped inside. She felt the isolation in her bones. The staff, Valerius's thralls, moved through the halls like silent automatons. They were humans, technically, but their eyes were vacant, their wills eroded by years of vampire glamour. They treated her with a terrifying, fragile reverence, offering her pillows and water with the same detached care one might give to a very expensive, very breakable vase. "Does the guest require elevation for the injury?" a maid asked, staring at Tessa's chin rather than her eyes. "Does the guest require temperature adjustment?" "I require you to stop staring at me like I'm going to explode," Tessa muttered, clutching her robe tighter. The maid didn't blink. She just bowed and backed away into the shadows. Tessa wandered away from the suffocating luxury of the guest wing, following a strange smell. In a place that usually smelled of ozone, old books, and antiseptic, the distinct scent of carbonized carbohydrates was jarring. She found the kitchen. It was an industrial masterpiece of stainless steel and granite, clearly designed for aesthetics rather than use. And standing in the middle of it, perched on a step stool to reach the counter, was the heir to the throne. Selim was frowning deeply at a toaster. Smoke was billowing gently from the slots. Beside the appliance sat a plate containing a yellow, rubbery substance that looked vaguely like scrambled eggs, though the texture suggested industrial caulking. "I believe I have terminated the bread," Selim said without turning around. His voice was solemn, grave. Tessa stepped fully into the room, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. "Selim." The boy turned. He was still wearing pristine formal wear, though he had tied a massive chef's apron around his neck. It dragged on the floor like a bridal train. "The instructions said medium," Selim explained, gesturing helplessly to the smoking toaster. "I believe this machine is aggressive." He looked at the plate of eggs. "And the poultry spheres. They crunch." I attempted to remove the ceramic armor, but small fragments remain. Tessa walked over and peered at the plate. The eggs were riddled with shell fragments. The toast was a hockey puck. It was the most disastrous meal she had ever seen, and it was the sweetest thing anyone had done for her in 2 years. "They're called eggs," Tessa said, a small, painful smile tugging at her lips. She reached out and popped the toaster lever. "And usually we try to keep the ceramic armor out of the pan." "Inefficient design," Selim muttered, hopping down from the stool. "Putting soft nutrients inside hard casings." He pushed the plate toward her with hopeful, violet eyes. "Dr. Eris said your hemoglobin is low. Humans require carbon and protein to manufacture blood." I wish to assist." Tessa sat on one of the high stools. She picked up a fork and ate a bite of the crunchy, rubbery eggs. It tasted like charcoal and good intentions. "Thank you," she whispered. Selim watched her eat with the intensity of a scientist observing a lab experiment. Does it function? Is the flavor correct? It's perfect, she lied. She swallowed past the lump in her throat. Why do you care, Selim? I'm just a human. In your world, I'm lunch. Selim recoiled slightly, looking at his pale hands. You are not lunch. You are the reason I am still existing. He paused, looking at the blackened windows that sealed the room in eternal twilight. Father says the sun is a nuclear fire, that it turns our kind to ash in seconds. He looked up at her, his expression small and yearning. But in the library, the books say it feels like a warm blanket. They say it makes colors exist. He touched her hand. His skin was marble cold against hers. What does it feel like? To stand in it. Tessa closed her eyes, remembering the Boston Common in July, before the tragedy, before the streets, before the cold took over her life. It feels heavy, she said softly, but in a good way, like gold poured over your skin. It wakes you up. It finds the cold places inside your bones and pushes them out. Selim listened as if she were reciting a holy text. He looked at the black glass, then back at her. I will live for 1,000 years, he whispered. I will see empires fall and cities rise. I will be king of the night, but I will never know what yellow looks like. Tessa looked at the powerful, terrifying boy who couldn't make toast and realized that while she had saved his life, he was just as trapped as she was. It's just a star, Selim, she said, reaching out to squeeze his freezing hand. No, he shook his head, his eyes ancient and sad. It is the one thing I cannot conquer. Dawn did not break gently over the penthouse. It arrived with the violence of a breaching charge. Tessa had been dozing in the library, watching Selim arrange chess pieces with telekinetic nudges, when the world exploded into blinding, impossible white. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but of light, a harsh, sterilizing brilliance that erupted from canisters rolling across the marble floor. UV grenades. To Tessa, the flash was disorienting, like staring into a camera strobe, but to Selim, it was acid. The boy screamed, a sound that shattered the crystal decanters on the sidebar and curled into a ball, shielding his face as smoke began to rise from his exposed skin. Selim. Tessa lunged from the armchair, ignoring the stitch in her side that pulled tight. She threw the heavy velvet throw blanket over the boy, burying him beneath the fabric to block the searing radiance. Shadows detached themselves from the light. Men in tactical gear rappelled through the skylight, their boots hitting the floor with heavy thuds. They wore polarized goggles and carried weapons that hummed with ultraviolet charges. The Varkalak mercenaries. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to exterminate the blind. Secure the Heir, one of them shouted, his voice distorted by a modulator. Burn the rest. Tessa scrambled back, putting herself between the trembling lump under the blanket and the advancing soldiers. She was unarmed, injured, and human, but the instinct that had driven her into the alleyway days ago flared up again. A mercenary broke from the pack, bypassing the groaning thralls, and zeroed in on her. He moved with the supernatural speed of a turned vampire, but the UV light was slowing him down, making his movements jerky and pained. He grabbed Tessa by the throat, lifting her off her feet. So this is it, the assassin hissed, his face inches from hers. His skin was blistering under the assault of the grenades, peeling away to reveal raw muscle.
The pet.
The weakness. Tessa clawed at his gauntlet, her legs kicking uselessly. The king won't leave his fortress for a challenge. The Varkalak sneered, tightening his grip until black spots danced in Tessa's vision. But he'll come out for his heart. If I take you, he follows. You're the bait, little meat. He began to drag her toward the broken skylight, away from Selim. Tessa flailed, her hand sweeping across Valerius's mahogany desk as she was hauled backward. Her fingers brushed leather, paper, and then cold metal. The letter opener. An ornate, heavy thing Valerius used to slice open correspondence from the council.
Silver.
The realization hit her through the haze of hypoxia. Valerius kept old-world warnings on his desk. With a guttural cry of effort, Tessa gripped the handle and swung her arm backward. She didn't aim for the chest armor. She aimed for the exposed flesh of the arm holding her neck. She drove the silver blade deep into the vampire's forearm. The effect was instantaneous. The assassin shrieked, a sound more animal than human, and dropped her. Smoke billowed from the wound where the silver touched dead flesh, sizzling like bacon on a hot skillet. He stared at the utensil protruding from his arm in disbelief, then back at Tessa with murder in his eyes. "You filth," he roared, raising a clawed hand to eviscerate her. He never brought it down. A shadow fell over him, darker than the deepest corner of the room, immune to the searing lights. Valerius Thorn materialized from the chaos. His skin was burned, his suit smoking from the UV exposure, but his rage was absolute. "You touched her," Valerius whispered. Before the assassin could scream, Valerius gripped the intruder's head with both hands. There was a wet, sickening crunch, and the Varkalak's body went limp, falling to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. Valerius stepped over the corpse, ignoring the tactical lights burning his flesh, and pulled Tessa to her feet. His eyes were bleeding crimson tears, a reaction to the light, but his focus was entirely on her neck, where a bruise was already forming. "Are you intact?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a fury that shook the room. "Selim," Tessa gasped, pointing to the blanket. "He's under the blanket." Valerius looked at the woman who, armed with a letter opener and terrified out of her mind, had once again chosen to protect his son before herself. He pulled her against his chest, shielding her from the carnage as his guards finally swarmed the room to slaughter the remaining intruders. "I have him," Valerius vowed into her hair. "And I have you." The rooftop garden was a miracle of botany and engineering, a glass-encased sanctuary where night-blooming jasmine and moonflowers thrived under artificial starlight. It was beautiful, silent, and cold, just like the man standing beside the fountain. Valerius Thorn traced the dark bruise on Tessa's neck with a thumb that felt like polished marble. The attack had been repelled, the bodies cleared, but the fear still lingered in the air like smoke. He could hear the frantic rhythm of her heart, a fragile drumbeat that terrified him with its impermanence. "You nearly died today," Valerius said, his voice low. "Again." Tessa leaned into his touch, too exhausted to pull away. "I didn't. You stopped him." "I was almost too late. Next time, the Varkalak will send more. Or the sun will catch you. Or time itself will simply wear you down." He turned her gently to face him, his crimson eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "You are breakable, Tessa. Everything about you is soft, finite, and weak. I cannot endure watching you bleed." He stepped closer, closing the distance until the cold radiating from his suit seeped into her skin. "There is a way to stop the fear. I can give you the dark gift. I can purge the mortality from your veins and replace it with starlight and iron. You would never bleed again. You would never age. You would be a queen of the night court, safe beside me and Selim forever." It was the ultimate offer. Immortality.
Power. Safety.
Tessa stared at him, tears welling in her eyes, but they weren't tears of gratitude. They were tears of mourning. She stepped back, breaking the contact, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold her shattering pieces together. "No," she whispered. Valerius stiffened. "You refuse? Do you not understand? I am offering you eternity." "I don't want eternity," Tessa choked out, the sob finally breaking free. "I want Tuesday." She gestured to the glass ceiling, beyond which lay only darkness. "I want to feel the sun on my face without burning. I want to drink coffee that doesn't taste like ash. I want to grow old Valerius. I want wrinkles. I want to sit on a porch and watch the sunset and know that my time is running out, because that's what makes it matter." She looked at him, her human eyes filled with a devastating clarity. "Your world is beautiful, Valerius. But it's cold. It's so cold. If I take your gift, I lose the only thing I have left. I lose the light." Valerius watched her weep, the sound tearing at something inside him he thought had withered centuries ago. He looked at his own hands, pale, lethal, frozen in time. He looked at the garden that never saw the sun, preserved in a perfect, airless stasis. He had thought he was offering her salvation. He realized now, with a crushing weight in his chest, that he was merely offering her a better cell. He was the cage. His love, his protection, his world. It was all a prison of gold and blood. He was trying to keep a creature of the sun in a box of shadows, because he couldn't bear to let her go. It wasn't protection. It was possession. "I am sorry," Valerius whispered into the jasmine-scented air. The crimson faded from his eyes, leaving them a dark, sorrowful charcoal. "I thought I was saving you. I see now that I am the thing you need saving from." Selim's chamber was not a bedroom. It was a vault carved from the bedrock of the city, lined with lead and spell-warded stone. Valerius entered the silence, the heavy iron door sealing the noise of the upper world behind him. The boy sat on the edge of a sarcophagus, a bed carved from black granite, softened only by piles of velvet. He was staring at the blank stone floor, his small, pale hands gripping the edge of the mattress until the stone cracked beneath his fingers. "She refused," Selim said. "It wasn't a question." "She did," Valerius replied, stepping into the circle of dim witchlight that illuminated the room. "She chose her own nature over ours. We could make her stay." Selim looked up, his violet eyes wet with tears that wouldn't fall. "We are strong enough. We could lock the doors. We could keep her safe here, even if she hates it. At least she would be alive." Valerius sat beside his son, the movement stiff and heavy. He saw the terrifying selfishness of his own bloodline reflected in the boy's grief, the instinct to hoard, to possess, to consume. "Do you remember your mother, Selim?" The boy blinked, the question catching him off guard. "I remember she was warm. She smelled like rain. She was the brightest thing I had ever seen," Valerius said, his voice rough with a centuries-old ache. "And because I loved her, I tried to keep her. I built this fortress to shield her from my enemies. I kept her out of the sun so she would be close to me. I thought I was protecting her." He looked at his hands, which had dealt death to thousands but failed to save the one life that mattered. "But humans are like flowers, Selim. If you keep them in the dark too long, they don't just fade. They wither. My love became her cage, and by the time I realized it, her light was already gone." Selim stared at his father, the realization dawning slowly on his young face. "If Tessa stays, she will break," Valerius finished. "The Varkalak will hunt her. The Council will despise her. And the lack of sunlight will hollow her out until she is just a ghost haunting our halls. If we truly love her, Selim, if she is truly Pack, then we must do the hardest thing a predator can do." "We have to let the prey go," Selim whispered, his voice cracking. "We have to set the bird free." Valerius stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket, locking the father away and letting the king return. "Say your goodbyes, my son. Make them count." Valerius left the crypt before his own resolve could shatter. He walked down the corridor to his private study, a room soundproofed against the screaming of the city. He picked up a phone that existed on no network, a device of encrypted satellite frequencies used only for the gravest of favors. He dialed a number he hadn't used in 50 years. The Grave Walker. A distorted voice answered on the first ring. "I need a ghost," Valerius said, staring out at the city lights that burned like distant stars. A complete extraction. Erasure of past records. Birth certificate, passport, deed to a property in a location with high solar exposure. Irrevocable trust fund. The subject. Tessa Cole. She died tonight in a tragic alleyway mugging. Her body will not be found. Valerius watched his reflection in the glass, a monster trying to be a savior. The new identity? Sarah Mitchell, Valerius said, giving her the name of the woman his son's mother had been before the darkness took her. Give her a life in the sun. The private airstrip was a scar of asphalt cutting through the dense pine forests north of Boston. There were no guards, no entourage, just the sleek silhouette of a Gulfstream jet waiting with its engines idling, a mechanical beast breathing white vapor into the freezing night. Valerius Thorne drove the sedan himself. He stopped near the boarding stairs and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy with things that couldn't be said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, placing it in Tessa's lap. "The deed to a cottage in Naples, Florida," Valerius said, his voice devoid of the imperious tone of a king. "It faces the Gulf. The sun sets directly over the water. You will have maximum exposure." Tessa opened the envelope. Inside were keys, a passport, and bank documents. Sarah Mitchell. She read the name on the ID. The photo was new, taken while she slept, digitally altered to look healthier, tanned, alive. "The account is untraceable," Valerius continued. "You will never have to work again. You will never have to be cold again." "Valerius," Tessa started, her hand trembling on the door handle. "Do not thank me," he cut her off gently. "I am not giving you a gift. I am paying a debt. You saved the heir. This is the price of his life." The back door opened. Selim stepped out into the biting wind. He wasn't wearing a coat. The cold meant nothing to him. He walked to Tessa's window, holding a piece of stiff cardstock. "I made this," the boy whispered. Tessa took the drawing. It was crude, done in wax crayon. Two stick figures stood holding hands, one tall and pale, one smaller. Above them, filling half the page, was a massive, scribbled circle done in violent, waxy strokes. "It is the sun," Selim explained solemnly. "I used the crayon labeled lemon. I cannot see the color, Tessa. To me, it looks like gray ash. But the book said yellow is the color of happiness." Tessa broke. She reached through the open window and pulled the vampire child into a hug, burying her face in his shoulder. He smelled of rain and stone. He hugged her back, his grip careful and terrifyingly strong. "Be happy in the yellow, Tessa," Selim whispered. "I will," she sobbed. "I promise." She pulled away, grabbed her meager belongings, now replaced with high-end luggage, and walked toward the jet without looking back. She knew if she turned around, she would stay, and if she stayed, she would die. 6 hours later, Sarah Mitchell stepped onto the tarmac in Naples. The heat hit her like a physical blow, thick and humid and smelling of salt spray. It wasn't the biting cold of Boston or the sterile chill of the penthouse. It was heavy, living warmth. She looked up. The sky was a blinding, impossible blue. The sun hammered down on her skin, not burning, but embracing. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air that didn't taste of ozone or blood. She was free. 1,000 miles away, in a room sealed against the light, Valerius Thorne sat alone at his desk. The only illumination came from his laptop screen. It showed a live satellite feed, crystal clear. A woman with golden hair was walking along a white sand beach, her shoes in her hand, letting the tide wash over her feet. She stopped, turned her face up to the sun, and smiled. A true, unburdened smile. Valerius traced the image of her face on the screen with a pale finger. "Goodbye, Sarah," he whispered to the silence. He closed the laptop. The screen went black, and the Vampire King sat alone in the dark, content. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as intriguing as you can ever imagine. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next story.